staying safe at home. All right, we'll give people a couple of minutes to get here.
Okay.
And then we'll get started.
Hello.
Hi, Kenzie. How are you?
I'm good, and you?
Good. We're just giving people a minute to get here, and then we'll get started.
Okay.
Hey, we agreed to dip the water.
Hi, Nicole. We're just giving it a second for people to get here. And so I can finish my snack. Hi, Peyton.
Hi.
We're just giving it a second. How's everybody doing?
I'm pretty good.
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 Yeah.
The weather's nice.
Yeah, but now it's kind of starting to like really set in that we can't go out.
Yeah, right. But it was much easier. It was like raining outside. And
Yeah.
Well, don't be confused. You can go outside. You just have to stay. You have to stay a safe distance from people.
That's true.
So it's
I'm a
important.
social creature. I need interaction.
You know what I did with my friend the other night is we went on a walk together, hi Lena, where we were just on FaceTime and we were just like doing my nightly walk, but like I could still see her. So I felt like I was like walking with my friend.
That's nice. I might do something like that too then.
That's cute.
Yeah, because then that way we both got outside and we're like getting fresh air and like getting some exercise, but then we could chat about, life.
Yeah.
It's important. Being outside, getting sunshine, it's super important. Even if you just go outside to like eat your lunch or, as long as you're safe about it and you're not around other people. How did the drive-through for my seniors? How did the drive-through cap and gown pickup and everything go? Was it nice to see the teachers and the signs and?
Yeah, it was nice.
Yeah. Did you see my sign? They put it up for me. I made one for you guys.
Yes, I cried.
Aww.
I could not stop crying that day. Literally, as I was as my mom was driving me through, the tears would not stop. I did my makeup and it was just waterproof mascara was the trick that day.
Yeah, no kidding. So I don't know if you guys saw, I switched the schedule for today because I think we got a lot of things that we can still cover with the DSM because there's so many cool things to look at. And then I'm going to combine ADHD, and I think I combined it with hoarding for Wednesday. We're going to keep going until the 22nd, and then I'm not going to present any new material after the 22nd. And then you guys can just kind of, I'm going to present a schedule to you guys later this week. I just have to get it approved by admin. But basically, with no new material after the 22nd, it just allows you to see if you need to catch up on anything. I am going to provide some fun activities. So if you want to try and raise your grade, if you've done all the required stuff and now you just want to raise your grade, I'm going to provide some extra activities so that you can still raise your grade. So you still have an opportunity to get a higher grade if you want. Yeah, Lena.
So we are not having a final for this time?
No final.
Okay.
Yeah. No final.
Nope.
I'm good with that.
I'm not complaining about not having a final.
What was your question?
No finals? What a year, man.
I was just thinking, because I saw like the district thing where we're not having finals or anything like that,
Huh?
but then my math teacher just posted saying we're gonna have a final.
Are you in an
So-
AP class?
Honors trig.
Huh. I wonder if they had to get that approved through admin. I mean, I wasn't going to give you guys a final anyway because this is an elective, so it just seems silly to like put that kind of pressure on people. Who's your teacher?
Mr. Patey.
Do you want me to ask about it, or do you want to ask him about it?
No, yeah. Could you ask him about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Just say, yeah. Since the district said one thing.
Yeah, well, because they said like we're gonna have a final exam as an opportunity to raise your grade, but so I don't know what that means. And we're only like we have our FRQ tomorrow, and then we're not doing anything because of like for AP exams to let us study for them. But like, so I don't know if I'm gonna get a chance to ask him on like a Google Meet or something like that, and I'm terrified of emailing him. So.
Oh, you shouldn't be. No, but I can absolutely ask him to help clarify. So you're just curious that with the opportunity to take the final, is it only to raise your grade, and if you do poorly, it can't drop you? Is that the question?
Yeah, that's my question. Because, well, like I have an A in the class now. Like I want an A so badly this semester, and I have an A now, but I had a C when we started distance learning because I had missed a bunch of stuff because I was sick.
Yeah.
So I didn't know, like, also the thing where it's like, oh, nothing can drop your grades. I don't know if my grade can't drop lower than an A that it is now, or it can't drop lower than it was when we started.
It can't drop lower than when we started.
Okay.
Yeah. So that would be, so it's good. I'll clarify that for you. And then I'll have him, I'll just say, hey, just so you know, one of your students reached out and just has a question about clarifying what does that final mean? They're worried that it could drop their grade because it said in there with the opportunity to raise your grade, but they're curious, will it drop their grade if they do poorly?
Okay.
And then let me know. Yeah. And then just message me. I'll do that later this afternoon. And then message me if you haven't heard by the end of tomorrow, then let me know.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Let's get started. All right, so this was just going to be more discussion. This is just us kind of exploring some stuff and asking each other questions and kind of figuring things out. Can everyone see the PowerPoint? Okay, perfect. The PowerPoint is fine. We're actually going to go to a different website, but I just want to start here. Kind of which ones did you already know about when you looked at the DSM-5? Which ones had you heard about, but you didn't really know what they were? And then which ones did you learn about the first time when you were looking at it? So does somebody want to share which one, like just one type of disorder that you already knew about? Don't all go at once. Anyone?
I already know about PTSD.
What did you know about it?
Well, like I know someone who has PTSD, so I've like talked to them about it, and I just know about like how people can have like the trauma makes people have flashbacks and stuff like that. Like that's the anxiety that they get because of it. Like they can have flashbacks and stuff like that. So I said that I already knew that one, and then also I already knew about like anxiety and depression.
Okay, perfect, good. And PTSD, I think a lot of times PTSD gets lumped in with like military issues, but there are a lot of ways that someone can develop PTSD. It's not just a military thing, although it is a big conversation in the military. I mean, there are plenty of ways to get PTSD just in regular life as well.
How flexible is PTSD?
Huh?
How flexible is PTSD?
What do you mean by flexible? You mean like how treatable is it?
Like how easy is it to get it? Like what's one maybe event that could seem small but could really like impact someone in the long term?
Yeah. And that's again where psychology is such a tough science because it really is individualized how somebody's going to react to certain situations. So sometimes people will be diagnosed from PTSD from losing a loved one, and it's almost like a separation anxiety mixed with PTSD. They can't get over the loss, right? And then some people have it from situations where they're in a wartime combat situation. So it really can be a huge range of things that will lead to a PTSD diagnosis. And we're going to look at that too, by the way. We'll look at some of these. All right. Which ones have you heard about and we recognize the names of, but maybe we didn't know that much about them?
The dissociative disorders one?
Yeah. So where have you seen or heard of dissociative disorders? Or had it just been the term that you've heard?
I've always like heard like the term like thrown around like, oh, like the coping mechanism was like, oh, they just like dissociated with like normal life. But I never really understood like what that meant.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. And we'll look at those today. Any other ones that you'd heard about, but you're like, I guess I really don't know what it is?
I said pica.
Yeah, it's actually pica, and pica. Yeah, if you go back to the I don't know, Peyton, if you saw my note, but if you go back to that PowerPoint on eating disorders, pica is a very unusual one. Pica is one where people eat things that aren't supposed to be edible, and so they'll end up eating like sofa cushions, or they will eat paper, or they will eat hair, or they will eat, there's one, I think one woman on the video was eating like drywall. She had punched a hole in the wall and then like it started eating the drywall.
Like that show on TLC where it's like My like Strange Obsession.
Yes.
My Strange Addiction.
Addiction, yeah.
I actually saw that episode where that girl is eating drywall. She keeps breaking her wall and she's eating it. Or the people who eat toilet paper. Oh my God, that's so funny.
That shit nasty.
Well, and you have to remember, and so this is where we switch, right? The whole point in taking a class like this is to really kind of understand the world around you. And, you know, everyday teenagers walking around, they learn about somebody eating drywall, and your immediate thought is, that's weird, that's crazy. Why would someone eat drywall? That's gross. Coming into it as an amateur psychologist, you start to understand this is a psychological disorder. This person is not consciously choosing to eat drywall. There is something happening in the brain that is telling them that eating drywall is what they want to do. And so this is where we start to learn to have empathy and understand that when we say something is a disorder, this isn't something that someone can help. This is something that needs to be helped. Does that make sense? All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's more understandable.
Yeah. And, you know, it's not like, and especially when you get into the ones that are really hardcore, like some of the philias, right? Like pedophilia. It's not that a person is choosing to go against society and harm small children. It's not what they want. Nobody wants to do that, but something inside their brain is not working properly. And so, you know, we have to remember that, you know, yes, while the acts that they choose to do go against the law and they need to be punished or you know, removed from society, because whatever sickness or whatever disorder is happening in their brain is causing them to think that they need to cause harm to other people. So psychopaths, sociopaths, pedophiles, all those. But they do have a mental disorder. And so that's a tough place to be in, because you have to sort of remember that they are still human beings too, right? And so, you know, being an everyday citizen, you make judgments. Being a student of psychology, you start to think about how could these people be helped? Are there treatments that could actually work for these different disorders? So we're going to take a look at some today. So let's go ahead. Here we go. I've already got the website pulled up. Can everybody see the website?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I like this website, and I'm going to put it into the sheet where you're going to see the quizzes, blah, 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 and the Google slide after this and the video of this. But I'll put it in there because I like that they take these psychological disorders and they kind of break them down in everyday speech. So it's not like reading your psychological textbook, right? It's actually giving you a description of what these things are. So we're just going to kind of run through. So did everyone get the note sheet open for today? Did it post? Okay, perfect. So just kind of type in And again, make sure it's in your own words, because if it doesn't make sense to you, then there's no point, right? So we'll just kind of run through and just kind of do like a general summarization of what they call in the DSM chapters are of different psychological disorders. Okay. So when we get to the first chapter, it's neurodevelopmental disorders, and these ones are typically diagnosed in the early stages of being a human being. So we're talking infancy, we're talking in toddlers or early adolescence. So we're looking at things that would be developmental, meaning what would be normal in the development of a human being as far as being able to think, use language, have ability to have coordination and things like that. So can anybody think of one? And good, I don't see it on the website right now. But can anybody think of one that would fall under neurodevelopmental disorders?
Autism?
Yes, exactly. So autism is one that was a big revision in the latest DSM just because they had a lot more information on it than they did before. So this is going to include like intellectual disabilities. So they used to refer to people with intellectual disabilities as people being mentally retarded. That is no longer a term that we use. So it's important to know that, right? There are certain terms that get outdated and that we no longer use. So instead we say people have an intellectual disability or an intellectual delay. Global developmental delay, okay? This is as far as just global, meaning like all the different things working together. So you're talking about your actual cognition, your ability to think, small children's ability to relate and socialize with each other, their speech, their language, and then their motor skills, their ability to coordinate things. Communication disorders, okay? And then that's where we find the autism spectrum. And they do call it a spectrum because it's a wide range within autism. And they're doing a lot of studies right now on autism in girls because it's very, a lot of the signs of autism in girls often show or present differently than they do in boys. So that's a big area of study right now in autism.
Yeah, girls get autism average around like when they're in their teens, because that's when they'll actually realize it.
Yeah, because a lot of times, because it presents so differently, they don't recognize it as autism in earlier years until they get to their teen years, and then that's when they're like, wait a minute, no, actually this is autism. The other one that I want to point out, and we're going to talk about this one, so I'll save it, but I just want to make sure we know this, is the terms ADD and ADHD. It's the same thing. So ADD is actually the old term for it. ADHD is what they use for it now. And so what it is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And when you have ADHD, you can have attention deficit, meaning you're unable to pay attention, or hyperactivity, or you could have both, but they all fall under the same thing. So a lot of times people say like, oh, he's ADD. No, he's ADHD. And you're like, whoa, it's the same thing. So ADD just is the outdated term for it. But we're going to talk about that one more next week. We're going to learn more about the specific kinds of drugs that we use to treat ADHD and how those work with like our neurotransmitters, et cetera. Now, bipolar, I think this one is a really interesting one because I think a lot of people hear about people being bipolar, but they don't necessarily know exactly what that means, right? So when we talk about bipolar disorder, let me pull this up so you can see the whole thing. Okay, it says it's characterized by shifts in mood as well as changes in activity and energy levels. Okay, so this is why I love this website. It puts it in plain context, right? The disorder often involves experiencing shifts between elevated moods. We call that mania. When I'm pointing to stuff with my mouse, can you see my mouse moving? Can anybody see my mouse moving or no?
I can see it.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, I can see it.
I'm not sure if you can only see the screen or if you can see my mouse. Okay, so elevated moods is mania. Okay. And then when it says periods of depression, then it's your depressive episodes. So a lot of times people who are bipolar actually have a lot of issues in their manic or their mania episodes because they're at such high levels that their body actually has a hard time sustaining that level of energy. And also, you'll notice in the description that when they're in manic phases or mania, they often do really impulsive things. So here it says, such as gambling or shopping sprees or things like that, but they can also do really impulsive things like self-harm and things like that too. So, so when you're looking at it, okay, hypo, just so you know, so right here where it says mania or hypomania, anytime in science when you see hypo, that means low. So if I said hypothermia, that means low body temperature, right? We're talking about low. Hyper is going to be high, okay? So when you have someone that's bipolar, they're experiencing like these ups and downs constantly. So that's a really hard thing, not only physically for your body to go through, but mentally to go from being super high, elevated, right, mania or manic phase, down to a low depressive state. So it's a very, very tough thing. What's great about bipolar disorder is that they have a lot of medications that are actually pretty good for bipolar patients. What would be something that we'd be afraid of, though, with bipolar patients in medication?
Maybe like they'd stop taking it.
That's exactly right. Yes. So a lot of times when they're in the depressive episodes, they know that they need medication, but when they're in their manic phase, they feel so good and they feel so on top of everything that a lot of times you'll have patients that have a hard time staying on their meds during their manic phases. And it's really important for these medications to stay consistent in order to have a good outcome from them, right? Okay, so let's keep going. All right, anxiety disorders. There's so many, right? But so here's where the basic description is, and then we're going to look at some specific ones, okay? So anxiety disorders are those that are characterized by excessive and persistent fear, worry, anxiety, related behavioral disturbances. We need to keep in mind that people worry, and that's okay. When does it actually become a disorder? When do we decide that it's abnormal behavior?
When it's affecting daily function.
There you go. So when the worry is so great that it actually impairs a person to function properly, then that's when we start moving into the realm of anxiety. So some of these we've heard of, right? So generalized anxiety disorder just means you worry about like everyday events. You excessively worry about things. Agoraphobia, right? This is a fear of public places. So a lot of people who are called agoraphobes will often be introverts. They will stay at home and they will only go out of their house or their comfort space when they feel they absolutely need something or they've going into a situation that's equally as safe to them. They do not like going out in public. They often avoid those kinds of situations because it'll trigger a panic attack in a lot of agoraphobes. Social anxiety disorder, okay, meaning that you constantly feeling worried about being judged by others or looked at by others. And so it affects your ability to function on a daily basis because you're so worried about it. Specific phobias. So here's where we're going to see a lot of our phobias. And actually, I'm going to switch up I'm going to put one of these in as like an extra activity about phobias for if you want to raise your grade. It's a really fun activity where you just kind of look at different phobias. But here, there's phobias for everything. So, but there's 4 main types of phobias, okay? They include natural events, okay? There's medical phobias, animal phobias, and situational phobias. So those are going to be 4 main categories of different types of phobias, okay? But it says here too that people often, when they're faced by a phobic object, meaning the thing that's causing them fear or anxiety, okay, people will often have very real medical outcomes from that. So maybe their heart rate goes up. They start throwing up, for instance, sometimes. They'll start trembling. So you'll see it play out in a very biological way because their body reacts to it. Okay. Does anyone know what would cause you to, like, what is that hormone? We talked about it. What starts pumping through your body when your system starts going on high alert?
Adrenaline.
Adrenaline. So adrenaline is going to cause your heart rate to go up. It can cause nausea because everything is up on such a heightened alert. And then also the tremors can start from adrenaline too, because you've got so much rushing through your body. And ACH, right, was that neurotransmitter that's also going to play a role in it. There's panic disorder, okay, characterized by panic attacks that often come out of the blue. You don't know why. And then separation anxiety disorder, where you have that fear of being separated from people or things that you feel safe with. So as soon as they're separated from that. And we talk about separation anxiety disorder a lot in animals too. And that's a big topic right now because everyone's saying, you know, everyone's home with their animals right now. What happens when everyone goes back to work and goes back to school, et cetera? What happens to these animals that are so used to being with us 24/7? And now we're going to go back to work and leave these animals alone. So they're, you know, a lot of vets are coming out with tips on how to help your pet kind of get used to you being gone again. So that's a big topic, not just for humans, but animals as well. Any questions so far? Okay. So trauma and stressor related, right? We have a basic understanding of what trauma is, okay? So it's when you have exposure to a traumatic event or a very stressful event. Acute stress disorder, adjustment disorders, meaning you have trouble adjusting to a major life change, okay? Post-traumatic stress disorder. So this is the one that we were going to talk about a little bit more about. So just like Peyton said, they include episodes of reliving or re-experiencing the event. So we call those flashbacks a lot of times, okay? You could have nightmares, you could have bursts of anger, difficulty concentrating, just a lot of different things that can happen. And that's just psychological. You can also have physical effects too with the increased heart rate, et cetera, with post-traumatic stress disorder. And then reactive attachment disorder, it's when you don't form healthy relationships between adults and children in the first years of childhood, okay? So the symptoms of the disorder include being withdrawn from adult caregivers and social emotional disturbances, meaning you weren't cared for as a child, and so now you have a hard time making connections with people. Now this one, Kenzie, this is what you were talking about, that you've heard about it, but like what exactly is it? The dissociative disorders, okay? So this is really fascinating. This is a great area to look into. So dissociative disorders are psychological disorders that involve disassociation or interruption of aspects of consciousness, including identity and memory. So now we're getting into the world. We see a lot of this in movies and TV. Amnesia, right? We've definitely seen that on TV or in movies where somebody all of a sudden has amnesia. They can't remember who they are. They can't remember where they're from, right? So there's short-term, long-term amnesia as two basics, and then there's different forms of it from there, okay? Dissociative identity disorder. This one is now called that, but it used to be called multiple personality disorder. So we've definitely seen this on movies and TV where somebody, you know, has one personality and all of a sudden it switches to another personality. So it's like different realities for the person all within their brain, okay? And it actually changes, not only will it change like their behavior, but it changes their memories. So if I've got multiple personality disorder, and one of my personalities is a 40-year-old man, in my head, I carry a set of memories for that 40-year-old man. Then my other personality might be like an 80-year-old woman, and I carry a separate set of memories living as that 80-year-old woman, which is awesome. I mean, to think that your brain can do that is crazy, right? The brain is so complex. All right. So then we've got depersonalization disorder, okay? This is where people actually experience a sense of being outside their own body, like they're disconnected with their reality. So people often have a sense of like like their own memories don't seem like they're their memories. It seems like it's somebody else's memories. Like they can recall stories, and when actuality, those stories pertain to them, but they think it's somebody else. Does anyone have questions about these ones? I find these ones to be a very fascinating section of the DSM.
It's kind of like, it's so weird to think about that. Like your brain can just make different versions of yourself, or different like different people entirely.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of those personalities can be versions of who you are. So sometimes like a personality will be the person but stuck at age 5, right? So it is the same person, but it is their memories at age 5 and they still feel like they're at age 5. Other times it's completely different personalities with completely different behaviors, with completely different memories. And it's just fascinating that the brain is able to do that. All right. Somatic symptoms and related disorders. Okay. So this used to be called the somatoform. I always have trouble with that word, disorders. In this category, okay, are going to be psychological disorders that involve prominent physical symptoms, but might not have a diagnosable physical cause. So this is interesting, okay? So this is where, so it involves a preoccupation with physical symptoms that make it difficult to function normally. This preoccupation with symptoms results in emotional distress, difficulty coping with daily life. What's another way that we describe somebody that feels physical symptoms and it preoccupies them, but there actually are no physical symptoms there? Does anyone know what that's called? Where they make up physical symptoms. Like they make up the fact that they're feeling sick, but no doctor can actually diagnose anything physically wrong with them. Does anyone know what this has been referred to before? It starts with an H.
I don't know.
Hypo.
Plagia?
No. Hypochondriac. Has anyone ever heard that term before? A hypochondriac?
Yeah, I have.
From the fridge, from the beginning of the fridge to the end of that wall.
Hold on, Ariane, I'm going to put you on mute. There we go. Okay, perfect. Yeah, right? So take a look at these, right? So illness, anxiety disorder characterized by an excessive concern about having an undiagnosed medical condition, all right? You excessively worry about, like, I think I have cancer, but no one's telling me otherwise. And you constantly think you have cancer and you're trying to get testing and treatment, but nothing is ever found, okay? Conversion disorder involves experiencing motor or sensory symptoms that lack comparable neurological or medical explanation. We're on the same lines here, right? As far as like you're experiencing these motor sensations of like, I can't move my arm, but no one can explain why. And it might be an emotional or psychological reason why you're not doing it instead of medical, okay? This one, okay? A factitious disorder is when the individual intentionally creates, fakes, or exaggerates symptoms of illness. Has anyone ever heard of Munchausen syndrome?
Isn't that what it was in The Act? The show The Act?
Oh, I don't know. I didn't see that show.
Oh, that's what it was, like the mom like faked her daughter's
Yes.
like sickness.
Yes. Munchausen syndrome is where you either fake someone else's illness or you actually make them sick in order to receive sympathy and empathy from others. So this happens a lot of time with parents and I shouldn't say a lot of time, this is very rare, but in stories like that, where a parent will tell everyone that their child has cancer, and then they'll make the daughter believe, let's say in that case, right, the daughter believe that she has cancer, and they'll shave her head, and they'll do all these different things that would go along with somebody that has cancer, but she doesn't actually have cancer. The mom has this disorder, and really the mom just wanted the attention and the sympathy and the empathy of others for having a daughter that has cancer. Okay, very interesting. All right, now this one we kind of already know about, right? So feeding and eating disorders, we talked about anorexia and bulimia. Okay, this one, rumination disease, is fascinating. All right, so this one is where people chew their food, swallow their food, and then bring it back up, but not to throw up like in bulimia, not to purge it, but to re-chew it and re-swallow it. Okay. Pica is what Peyton was talking about, is where you crave or consume non-food substances such as dirt, paint, soap. I mean, yeah, in that show on TLC, My Strange Addiction, they show tons of people with pica who eat random things. Glass. There was a woman who, for instance, and this is a very sad situation. Her husband had passed away, and she was eating his ashes. So when you get into a behavior like that, clearly we would consider that abnormal. It goes against societal norms. And normally we would say, oh my gosh, right? That is so weird. But we have to remember that as students of psychology, we have to say to ourselves, wow, the psychological disorder that must be happening to have someone feel like they need to eat the ashes of their loved one, right? Has to be great. So this is where we start building our empathy for people. Binge eating disorder, okay, was a new one that got added, but this is just where people binge, but they're not necessarily purging, okay? Sleep-wake disorders. So sleep-wake disorders would include anything that has to do with sleeping and waking up, as far as narcolepsy. So narcolepsy is one of the most popular ones that people talk about in this category. People feel the need to sleep no matter where they're at. So you'll often find them, like they'll sit down and then they'll just fall asleep. People do have injury sometimes from this because they'll have a sudden loss of muscle coordination, and they'll just fall asleep, and sometimes that's standing, and you'll see people fall and actually injure themselves from narcolepsy. Insomnia disorder includes not being able to get enough sleep to feel rested. Okay. Let's see here. Breathing related sleep disorders, parasomnias, okay, including this whole category is really what a lot of people get interested in and study. So this one right here is going to include sleepwalking, sleep terrors, sleep talking, and sleep eating. So anytime someone is suffering from one of those things, right, for a prolonged state, then it's going to fall under that. And then restless leg syndrome, okay, it's where they have like these different sensations, and it's based on your nerves also. Tugging, creeping, burning, crawling sensations in your legs. And it interferes with your ability to sleep because you get these at nighttime. Okay, so it's going to fall under, in the DSM, it's going to fall under that.
I know that the pineal gland is what controls like the sleep-wake cycle and everything. So is it like dysfunction because of the pineal gland? Like the pineal gland is what makes the disorders happen?
You know, they're not sure with the restless leg syndrome because what's happening is the nerves in the peripheral system are sending mismatched signals, right? Causing like tremors and things like that. So you can also have like ACH buildup that are going to cause tremors. I don't know that I'd have to look into this one, Peyton, only because I haven't looked most recently to see what they found. But I think they were looking at a combo of neurotransmitters, an imbalance of neurotransmitters, and then also maybe like a misfunctioning different parts of the brain. And pineal gland obviously would be one of those. So I'm not sure. I'll have to look that one up before we meet next time.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, this one was a newer edition. It is one that they didn't have in earlier editions of the DSM, and so they're still in the. I mean, ADD, used to be called ADD forever, and then they finally changed it in this last one to ADHD, and they still don't know the true cause of ADHD. They have ideas, but that's the problem with psychology. It makes it a tough science because you have the body and the mind working so closely together. How much is each of those contributing? And is it different for each person? So it just makes it real difficult. But it's fascinating. You know which one it skipped? Hold on. Let me see something. In your notes, did I include elimination disorders?
Yes.
Yeah, and I just realized that this website completely skips that one.
In the notes, though, it doesn't have the sleep-wake disorders.
It doesn't. Huh. Hold on. You know what? Go ahead. Do you guys know how to add? Do you know how to add a row in? If you right click, go into any row, and if you right click, and it'll say insert row below.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I got it. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Yeah, just so you know too, for any other class, that's how you do that. So the elimination disorders, usually it comes in the DSM, it's going to come right underneath the feeding and eating disorders. Elimination disorders actually have to do with actual elimination of waste. So some people have phobias, such as like they're too afraid to go to the bathroom and have a bowel movement, that they actually will hold in their bowel movements to the point where it makes them sick because their bowels will become toxic and septic.
Wait, is this, oh, that's in the elimination disorders?
That's an elimination disorder, yeah.
That's crazy that your body can like make something that like actually makes you like sick from the inside out.
Yep. Yeah. And there are other elimination disorders, but that's a big one, that where people have a fear of having a bowel movement. And then it actually, because all of that is just waste, right? So if it builds up too much and then it leaks into your system, that's toxic waste that's leaking into your system. And that's when you become septic.
Can elimination disorders also relate to like animal waste, or is it your own waste?
No, usually elimination disorders are going to be you.
Oh.
Just like feeding and eating disorders are going to be you. Now, if you have a tendency to eat animal feces, I don't know if that's where you're going with that, then that would be like under pica.
No, I mean like fear of like just like other animal like waste other than your own.
Like eating it? Or
No,
fear of it?
just like let's say you have like you taking care of a dog, and then like
you have a fear of animal waste.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's going to come back up here, and that won't be under feeding and eating disorders. That's going to be under, let me see where I had that. That's going to be under phobias.
Okay.
So that will be under the anxiety disorders. So all those phobias where you are afraid of things, that's going to be under like when you have a fear of a specific item, it's going to be under phobia.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And there's so many. Just wait. I highly recommend, even if you don't need to raise your grade, when I put out the activity to check out phobias, I highly recommend you do it. It's fascinating to see how many phobias there are. And some of them you're like, how would one get over that, right? Because there's even like a fear of breathing, so that you have to go through different therapies to be able to just not be afraid to breathe. And not very many people have that, but it is a real thing. All right, let's come back down. Okay, we'll go a little faster because now we're getting to ones that we've seen. Okay, so here we have the disruptive impulse control and conduct disorders. This is going to be like where you cannot control your willpower, your emotions, your behaviors, okay? So kleptomania, if you've ever heard of someone being called a kleptomaniac, they have the inability to stop themselves from stealing things. Pyromania, they have this desire and this impulse to set things on fire. Okay. Intermittent or explosive disorders, just where you have really, really intense anger, like moments of anger and violence. Okay. Conduct disorder and oppositional defiant disorder. All right. It's really when you're going against societal norms as far as aggression and behavior, and it's consistent and it's over a period of time, it's maybe deliberately harming others, either mentally or physically, or deliberately, not following rules, breaking rules over and over again, because that behavior is doing something as far as like giving you a sense of completion or sensation inside that you need to keep doing it, but you don't have any willpower to stop yourself from doing it.
Do we need to know like the definitions of each of the disorders for the quizzes?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
No. It'll just be a general overview. So what I would do is just kind of have a general sense of like when it says disruptive impulse control, if I said like somebody who cannot control their impulse to light things on fire suffers from an eating disorder, a disruptive impulse control disorder, or an elimination disorder, you would choose the right one. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. Yeah, no, we're not doing anything. This is more, I just think, because it's fascinating. I think it's just cool to know these things. I just want to make sure, especially for you guys, it'll be easy because you're doing this with me. I just want to make sure people that haven't been showing up, or at least, doing the basics of reading up on some of this or watching the video when we're done. So then that way they get to know a little bit about it. Now, this one, you'll hear a lot, oppositional defiant disorder, you'll hear a lot about in schools. As a diagnosis. So when somebody continually acts out, they'll bring in a school psychologist to work with them to see if they have ODD, to see if they have oppositional defiant disorder. Depressive disorders, right? So disorders, mood disorder, but it's going to include a lot of different things. And the problem is with depressive disorders is, and I think we talked about this in class when we were talking about the biology of food, for instance, right? When we're talking about sometimes your biology, or we were talking about thyroid, that's what it was, that sometimes people get diagnosed as being depressed, but really just biologically their thyroid is not functioning properly. And when that gets taken care of, then their energy comes back. They feel motivated, and that was a medical thing that gets misdiagnosed as a psychological thing, and sometimes vice versa. So depressive disorders cover a range, and they're really hard to diagnose as one specific thing sometimes, because you also have to make sure you're doing all the medical testing along with it to make sure it's not a medical condition. So there's a couple of different things. The disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. So it's when, a child displays frequent and intense outbursts of temper. Okay. Major depressive disorder. All right. Which is just severe depression. Persistent depressive disorder. Ongoing chronic depression. Other unspecified, right? This is just kind of a catch-all for, they're not quite sure where to place them, but they know they're suffering from a depressive disorder. There's premenstrual dysphoric disorder. So talking about, in the case of females, that this is going to go along with their menstrual cycle, that they'll feel these depressive symptoms usually before their menstrual cycle, okay? Depressive disorder due to other medical conditions. So if they have another medical condition that's causing depression as a side effect, then that would fall under there. You can also, with the premenstrual dysphoric disorder, then there's also, a lot of women suffer from depression right after they have a baby too. So there's a lot of things where the body, the medical side of things is going to play in with the psychological things. All right. Okay. Substance. Now, this is where it really ramped up in the DSM-5 because, they go about 10 to 12 years before they do revisions. So from that 4th edition to the 5th edition, this one got a huge update. So in substance, this is pretty straightforward. You don't need to know a ton about specifics because they all kind of make sense. And they're broken down by the types of substances that you would have disorders under. So alcohol-related disorders, so alcoholism, etc., right? Natural psychological part of that. Cannabis-related disorders, inhalant use disorders. Does everyone know what an inhalant is? So people that huff, right? So like if you are inhaling things like spray paint and things like that, it's horrific for your brain. And it's going to cause a lot of psychological problems by doing it. Stimulant. So this is going to be things such as methamphetamines and cocaine. We're going to talk about this one next week on Wednesday when we talk about ADHD, because even prescription medications that are prescribed for ADHD are stimulants and people will misuse those. Tobacco use. Also, it includes gambling disorder, okay, is going to be included under this, okay? Neurocognitive disorder. This is going to be where your brain's ability to function slowly declines. So can anybody think of an illness, a mental illness that happens or disorder that happens as your brain function starts to decline in your old age?
Alzheimer's?
Alzheimer's, absolutely. Okay, so that's where we're going to see these ones. So delirium, major mild neurocognitive disorders such as Alzheimer's. HIV also does have an aspect of that. Parkinson's, substance and medication use. So if you're constantly using and abusing medication, even over the counter or prescription, it can still cause a decline in neurofunction. Schizophrenia. Okay, this is the one that I think gets most misrepresented in the media. So it's a chronic psychiatric condition that affects a person's thinking, feeling, behavior, and it affects about 1% of the people in the US, so not a whole lot of people, okay? But you have to have certain criteria in order to actually be diagnosed as schizophrenia. So take a look at these. So one symptom has to be one of these. So either you have delusions, okay, or you actually are hallucinating, or you have disorganized speech. So you're speaking English language maybe, but like the words are all mixed up and not in the correct order, and it's hard to understand. And then the second symptom, so you have to have 2 or more symptoms, okay, and they have to be present for at least a month in order to be categorized as schizophrenia. So you could also be grossly disorganized or be in a catatonic state. So when it says catatonic behavior, so a lot of times when they talk about catatonic, they mean that you are not in a state of arousal. Like you are there physically, your eyes are open, your basic functions are happening, but you're not engaging mentally, okay? Negative symptoms such as the inability to initiate plans, speak, express emotions, etc. Okay. So a lot of times when we see schizophrenics represented in the media, how do we see them represented?
Like there was like talking to themselves or like talking to other people that are not there.
Correct. So that's where you get the delusions or the hallucinations. Also, the delusions often get portrayed as paranoia, right? Like people are out to get me. So it's not that sometimes they're not even hallucinating. They just have a feeling of like somebody's out to get me. I need to get out of here. That is all very true, but it doesn't have to be as dramatic as what you see sometimes. It can be a lot less played down, and you can still have those things happening. Now, here's the thing with schizophrenia, okay? So usually schizophrenia shows up not until like late teens, early 20s. So people that suffer from schizophrenia will have a very normal childhood, and then all of a sudden, late teens or early 20s, they could be very high functioning before, and then all of a sudden start experiencing some of these things. Okay. Men start usually showing symptoms earlier than women. Okay. And usually it's gradual. It's not going to be all of a sudden one day they're normal and the next day they have hallucinations. A lot of times you'll have very like low level symptoms that will build into what we would see as like being portrayed on the media. Okay. Now, there is a relation between genetics and schizophrenia. So you do have a higher chance of getting schizophrenia if you have schizophrenia that runs in your family. So just so you know, and I think we talked about that when we talked about genetics and how things are related. We looked at some of the numbers in there. Okay. Obsessive compulsive, we know this, it's where you're obsessing over things. We talked about this. We're going to save this one because we're going to talk specifically about hoarding disorder. Okay, so we'll come back to that and talk about OCD and hoarding. So you can leave that one alone. As far as for a note for that one, obsessive compulsive disorder is kind of what I really want you to know. That's going to be the biggest one that comes out of this category. It's where you have constant thoughts or impulses that lead to like a sense of stress or anxiety. So sometimes people have to tap their computer 3 times before they can write, and then tap 3 times before you can write again. Some people have to constantly check the stove to see if it's off before leaving the house. And when I say constantly, I mean like 10 to 20 times. Again, that goes outside the realm of normal behavior. But we'll learn a little bit more about OCD. Personality disorders, okay? This is not going to be Tourette's. No, Tourette's is actually, let me come back to Tourette's, because Tourette's is actually interesting in how the brain is working there medically, but also from a psychological standpoint. So I'm going to come back to that one this week when we talk about other stuff. Great question, Kenzie. This one, I want to make sure that we know is a little bit different. So we're not talking about, when we talk about personality disorders, we're not talking about the same thing as multiple personality disorders. That's different. That's dissociative. This is where we see people who have trouble fitting in or functioning in society. Antisocial personality disorder. This is where we see psychopaths and sociopaths. Okay? They have difficulty feeling empathy for others. They lack remorse for their destructive behaviors. And there is a difference between psychopaths and sociopaths. And I am going to offer that up as an extra activity if you want to do it to raise your grade. It's a really fascinating thing. But both of those actually fall under antisocial personality disorder. It used to be separate, and now they just consider it all one thing. And I'll kind of talk about that in that lesson. Avoidant personality disorder. Okay, so you inhibit sensitivity to rejection. Borderline personality disorder. You're emotionally unstable. It goes on and on. There's so many. Narcissistic. So we've heard the word narcissist or narcissism thrown around a lot. We want to make sure that we know that that's when the person has an exaggerated sense of self-worth. Okay, that everything is about them, and they have low empathy for other people. Obsessive compulsive personality disorder. This is where this is where we talk about someone being OCD as far as they need perfection, and they're very inflexible on what they think is perfection. They have a hard time getting around that. Okay. And it's different than obsessive compulsive disorder. Obsessive compulsive disorder is where you have to, like I said, tap the screen 3 times before you can write. This is actually obsessive compulsive about themselves. and how they are perceived in the world. Okay. And then we keep going on. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to include this article because I think it's a great one, other than I just realized that it didn't include elimination. I think it's because maybe elimination disorders are not something a lot of people like to talk about, but they're really fascinating. So I'm going to include the link to this. I'll find another link to elimination disorders just so that you guys have it. And then I'll put a quizzes on tonight around 5 o'clock. And it's just going to be the basics. It's just going to be like I gave that one example. You know, if I have somebody who is afraid of snakes, which of the chapters would that fall under? Which of the chapters would a phobia of snakes fall under? So, and then I'll just give you options that you're going to choose from, just so that you have a general sense of what falls under what category. Does anyone have any questions?
Are we not talking about the paraphilic disorders?
Did that one not have it? You're right, it didn't have it in here either, did it?
Yeah, or sexual dysfunction.
They are afraid of stuff? Look at that. Yeah. Let's talk. Well, you know what, though? It's already 3 o'clock. Why don't I do this? Why don't I include those? Don't worry about the notes on it. And I'll put a note inside of the rest of the year schedule that will start with an intro with those things. I'll pull up elimination disorders. I'll do paraphilias, and I'll do the sexual and gender disorders because those are important. And then I'll quickly review those before we get to ADHD. I'll just change up the schedule because I don't want to keep you guys too long today.
Are those things going to be on our quizzes?
No. Those will be on the next one. So I'll put just the ones that are in this article that we just talked about. I'll just give examples and you tell me which category they fall under.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Does anyone want to talk about any of these in particular? Or does anybody have questions?
What is like sexual like dysfunction? Like what kind of disorder is that? Like are they like?
So we'll talk about that one next week because that'll be the ones that we circle back to. But let me see if I can pull in another one. Hold on. So you're gonna be looking at when you're looking at sexual dysfunction, there are different disorders where people have a hard time becoming aroused, and then it leads to depression and things like that. So that would be one. Number two, medically related sexual dysfunction. So sometimes, especially men who have, let's say, blood pressure issues and are on certain medications, have a hard time then becoming sexually aroused or being able to biologically become aroused. And so that will lead to psychological disorders. The gender disorders are going to be more about how people see themselves in society and their gender roles within society. So remember that sex is always going to be biology and gender is always going to be social, right? So I'll go over the differences and I'll give you guys examples of those ones on the next one. And I'll do elimination disorders also just real quick since we kind of talked about them, but I'll put it in there so that you guys can see it. And then, and the paraphilias we'll do too. The paraphilias are going to go along with, well, some of them will go along with the sexual stuff. Does anyone have any other questions? Okay. You guys are wonderful, as always.
Are all of these fairly common, or are these like?
No, they're not. So it just kind of depends on the disorder. I mean, you can search any of these, like how common is. So for instance, let's take some of these. Okay.
And like, can people have one, but like at a very like low level where it's like not even like noticeable?
Well, yes. So here. Okay. So let's take the philias, right? So someone can be here. I'm gonna show you. Give me just a second. Let me look this up so that you can see. Let's take pedophilia. Okay. Oh, I didn't mean to go to Wikipedia. I don't like Wikipedia. Hold on. Psychology Today. Okay. So if we're looking at pedophilia, is an ongoing sexual attraction to pre-pubertal children. So this is like pre-puberty, right? It is considered a paraphilia, a condition in which a person's sexual arousal and gratification depend on fantasizing about and engaging in sexual behavior that is atypical and extreme, okay? You can have people who suffer from pedophilia, but never actually act on it. So you can have someone who does this. They derive sexual arousal and gratification from fantasizing about, and that's all they do. They fantasize and they fulfill their own sexual needs, but they don't do it with other people, and especially not children. Then you have people who do cross the line and actually engage in the behavior, right? So there is that wide range, and there is, there are people that simply are able to control it to the extent where it's within themselves. And then there are people that can't. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. There are people like pyromania where they obsess over the idea of lighting something on fire, but they never actually light anything on fire. So there is that range.
Okay.
Yeah. It's fascinating. It really is. So, all right, I'm just gonna put a quick, easy quizzes up by 5 o'clock. It'll just have the ones that we went over, especially the ones that we really spent some time talking about. That way it's more for you guys to get easy points than anything. So I'll just make it quick and easy, but I will cover the philias and I'll cover the other stuff real quick on Wednesday.
Okay. Sounds good.
Sound good?
Yeah.
Okay, do you guys need anything else?
No.
No.
Okay, you guys are wonderful. Nicole, I'm glad you joined us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great Monday.
Thank you.
Bye.